Hi, Mossville. I'd like to point you to just simply one verse of Scripture. It's from Matthew chapter 6, and the very last verse of that chapter. It says, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will have enough worries for itself." How true that is. Just worry about tomorrow. Don't worry about today. Years ago, I remember taking a tour of what was then called the Mitsubishi plant in Bloomington. And at that plant, they demonstrated how they, of course, assembled automobiles. And they had what I had never heard of before, which was called just-on-time supply. In other words, they didn't have any warehouse of parts that they would go to when they needed them, but either by train or by truck, the parts would arrive just when they needed them. Just-on-time supplier. I think God is a just-on-time supplier. That's what this verse is pointing out to us. It's saying, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to have its own problems. And by implication, God is saying, and I'm going to be with you tomorrow, and the faith that you need tomorrow, I'll give to you tomorrow, but not any sooner. God is a just-on-time supplier. In the Old Testament, we have the story of manna. When the Israelites are in the desert and they're hungry and looking for food, God provided them with a miraculous food called manna. That manna would come every morning. And they would get a double portion of manna on the day before the Sabbath, and then the Sabbath day they would then be able to consume that. But if they tried to have the manna store over the night any other time, it would rot, and they couldn't eat it the next day. They had to rely on God to supply just on time for the next day. Will take care of itself. I shared last time I was with you, at least last time I was with you through technology, that we had our son Jordan who had cancer. I shared that I wanted to bring to you some adages that I live by. Now, one of these adages is, don't cry until you're hurt. Don't cry until you're hurt. Let me give you a little background about that story and how that related to Jordan. When I was growing up, of course, I was a Cardinal baseball fan. Even today, I think I've just become increasingly more dedicated as a fan. But during the 90s, and of course I was pastoring Washington at the time, but during the 90s was not a good decade for the Cardinals. We won no championship that decade. Unlike the Cubs, who would go 100 years without championship, we had gone 10 or so years without championship. There was a player, though, a very underrated player on the Cardinals, named Ray Lankford. Ray Lankford actually led the team in home runs almost every year. Ray Lankford was friends with the left fielder. Ray Lankford played center. Left fielder was a player named Bernard Gilkey. Well, during about the middle of that, about 1995, Gilkey was up for contract renewal. And according to Lankford, they were cheating him or not being very generous to Bernard Gilkey, his friend, his compadre out there in left field. And so he made a statement that the team would pay for it when Lankford made a statement, that when his contract came up. Now, nobody cared that much about Bernard Gilkey. We could lose to Bernard Gilkey. Actually, his only claim to fame was if you watched Men in Black 1 and saw a UFO land on a baseball field and the fielder looked up to it, that fielder was played by Bernard Gilkey. That's his claim to fame. But like I said, Ray Lankford was a very good ball player. And so people would call in the call-in shows, and Jack Buck was taking the calls one evening. And people were crying and crying. What we're going to do without Ray Lankford? He's our best player. We can't go anywhere without Ray Lankford, and so forth. because the statement he made that, it wasn't like he was going to sign a renewal contract with the Cardinals. And so, at any rate, Ray Lankford was on people's minds and heart. Now, Jack Buck, for us who grew up as Cardinal fans, was kind of like the father image. You always look for Jack Buck. If he was said anything was true, you knew it was to be true. Buck was a great guy. He was a veteran, a Purple Heart recipient during World War II. It was after 9/11 that he came out and read a poem that he had written that kind of calmed the hearts of the people. So we looked for Jack Buck to say something about Ray Lankford. Tell us, Jack, that he's not going to leave the team. And Jack said, "Don't cry until you're hurt. Don't cry until you're hurt." Now back to Jordan. When he was going through chemotherapy treatment, we had to give him daily a shot that would release his red bone marrow to fight infection. And so as I was preparing to give him the shot each day, being 6 years old, that was a terrible thing for him to look to. And he oftentimes would start crying even before I pulled out the needle. And it was just crying and just almost hysterics before I gave him the shot. And so I made him a deal. I said, "Jordan, if you don't cry until actually the needle goes in, until you actually get in the shot, then you can yell and scream if you want to, but don't cry before that, then I'll give you $1." And so we did that. And as he went through various episodes of chemotherapy and protocols of that, Jordan raised enough money to buy himself some street hockey equipment. Just don't cry until you're hurt. Just don't worry until tomorrow. Because when you get there tomorrow, first off, it may not hurt as bad as you think it will. But secondly, God will give you the faith that you need then, not necessarily the faith that you will need for this day. God is a God of a just on-time supplier. So don't cry until you're hurt. Don't cry until you're hurt. During this time of an epidemic, all of us can give way to imaginations and be fearful. What if this happens and what if that happens? What if this doesn't end up being like we'd like it to be, or want it to be, or need it to be? What does our future hold? I don't know. And you don't know. We can either let our imaginations run wild, or just simply learn that are we going to make it through this day, this hour, this time, and we'll let God take care of tomorrow. And whatever we need tomorrow, God will supply. So let's not waste our time crying until we hurt. May this thought go with you today. And God bless you for turning in. Stay with us. We're back with you tomorrow with another devotion from the weekday. God bless you, Mossville. Thank you for being with me.